In the heart of the Great Plains, beneath the endless sky of the American West, lay a land so sacred that the Lakota Sioux believed it to be the birthplace of their people. The Black Hills, rising majestically from the prairie, were more than mountains. They were temples, ancestors, and the very soul of the Sioux Nation. For generations, these peaks had watched over the buffalo herds, witnessed the sun dances, and sheltered the people through countless winters. But in 1874, everything changed when yellow metal was discovered in those sacred streams, and the word gold echoed across the frontier like a death sentence. Just 6 years earlier, in 1868, the United States government had signed the Fort Laramie Treaty with the Sioux people. In that document, witnessed by military officers and tribal chiefs alike, the government promised the Black Hills and surrounding territories to the Sioux Nation, for as long as the grass should grow and the rivers flow. It was meant to be forever. The Great Sioux Reservation stretched across what would become South Dakota and parts of North Dakota and Nebraska, a vast homeland where the Sioux could live according to their ancient ways. The treaty was sealed, the promises made, the words spoken before the Great Spirit. But promises written on paper proved as fragile as autumn leaves when gold fever swept the nation. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer led an expedition into the Black Hills in the summer of 1874. His mission was supposedly scientific exploration, but when his men discovered gold glittering in the creek beds, the news spread like wildfire. Within months, over 15,000 miners, prospectors, and fortune seekers flooded into the Black Hills, their wagon trains cutting deep scars across the sacred landscape. The U.S. government made a half-hearted offer to purchase the land, but the Sioux refused to sell what could never be owned. Their holy mountain, the place of their genesis, was not for sale at any price. The government's response was chilling. "If you will not sell, we will take." In November of 1875, President Ulysses Grant issued an ultimatum that would ignite the powder keg. All Sioux must report to the reservation by the 31st of January, 1876, or be considered hostile enemies of the United States, subject to military force. The winter was brutal that year, and many Sioux bands were scattered across the northern plains, hunting the diminishing buffalo herds. Even if they had wanted to comply, reaching the reservation through blizzards and frozen rivers would have been nearly impossible. But many had no intention of complying. Chiefs like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse had watched treaties broken too many times. They would not go quietly into captivity. War was coming, inevitable as spring following winter. The first blood of the Great Sioux War was spilled on the 17th of March, 1876, at the Battle of Powder River. Colonel Joseph Reynolds led his cavalry in a dawn attack against a peaceful Cheyenne and Sioux camp. The soldiers charged through the morning mist, shooting indiscriminately, killing mostly women, children, and elders caught sleeping in their lodges. But the warriors quickly organized, taking positions on the surrounding bluffs and pouring devastating fire onto the soldiers below. Reynolds, in his panic and incompetence, ordered the entire village burned, destroying precious winter food supplies, buffalo robes, and weapons his own army desperately needed. Even worse, he failed to guard the captured horses, and the Cheyenne warriors recaptured them by sunrise. The attack was a disaster for the army, achieving nothing except driving the northern Cheyenne straight into the arms of Crazy Horse, uniting the tribes in righteous fury. As spring turned to summer, the allied Sioux and Cheyenne forces grew stronger and more determined. Crazy Horse, whose name struck fear into soldiers' hearts, began planning bold strikes against the advancing columns. On the 17th of June, 1876, at Rosebud Creek, he would prove his genius as a military tactician. General George Crook had made camp with over 1,000 soldiers, supported by Crow and Shoshone scouts who had their own grievances against the Sioux. Crook had just ordered his men to rest when war cries split the morning air. Crazy Horse led a massive assault, his warriors pouring down from the bluffs like a thunderstorm. The Crow scouts barely gave warning in time, and for hours the battle raged across the valley, bullets and arrows filling the air with deadly whistles. It was here that a Cheyenne woman named Buffalo Calf Road Woman earned eternal glory, riding fearlessly into the thick of battle to rescue her brother when his horse was shot from under him. Despite his claims of victory, Crook retreated from the field at Rosebud, leaving it to the Sioux and Cheyenne. The native forces claimed a clear tactical victory and returned to the great gathering place on the river they called the Greasy Grass, known to the whites as the Little Bighorn. Here, the greatest encampment of Plains Indians ever assembled had come together. Thousands of lodges stretched along the river for miles, representing multiple bands of Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho. At the sun dance ceremony held in early June, Sitting Bull had performed the sacred ritual, cutting his flesh 100 times as an offering. In his trance, he received a powerful vision. Soldiers falling upside down from the sky into the Indian camp like grasshoppers falling into a fire. It was a prophecy of great victory, and the people believed. They did not know that 8 days after Rosebud, destiny would arrive in the form of the 7th Cavalry. On the 25th of June, 1876, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer divided his 7th Cavalry into 3 battalions, a decision that would echo through history. He sent Captain Frederick Benteen to scout the valley, ordered Major Marcus Reno to attack the southern end of the massive encampment, while he took 5 companies to strike from the north in a pincer movement. Custer's plan was to capture women and children as hostages, forcing the warriors to surrender. But nothing went as planned. When Reno charged the camp, the Sioux and Cheyenne did not flee in panic as expected. Instead, led by Chief Gall, they stood their ground and counterattacked with overwhelming force, driving Reno's men into a panicked retreat across the river. Meanwhile, Crazy Horse rallied hundreds of warriors and led them in a sweeping flanking movement against Custer's position. The great lieutenant colonel, whose golden curls and aggressive tactics had made him famous, suddenly found himself trapped on a ridge with no escape and no reinforcements coming. The final moments of Custer's battalion have been debated for over a century, but the outcome is undisputed. Surrounded on all sides by an estimated 2,000 warriors, Custer and his 200 soldiers made their last stand on a dusty ridge. The warriors attacked in waves, firing rifles captured from previous battles, launching arrows in dense volleys that darkened the sky, and closing in for hand-to-hand combat. Some accounts say Custer died early in the battle, shot from his horse. Others claim he fought to the end with his remaining officers. The Lakota warrior Rain-in-the-Face would later claim he killed one of Custer's brothers. What is certain is that within less than an hour, every single soldier in Custer's immediate command lay dead. Not one survived to tell the tale. When General Terry's forces arrived 2 days later, they found a scene of complete annihilation. Sitting Bull's vision had come true. The soldiers had indeed fallen from the sky into the camp, and they had been consumed like grasshoppers in fire. It was the greatest victory the Plains Indians would ever achieve, and it would be their last. News of Custer's defeat shocked the nation. In Washington, the military and political establishment reacted with fury and shame. How could a decorated Civil War officer and his entire command be wiped out by savages on the American frontier? The answer, which few wanted to acknowledge, was that the Plains Indians were brilliant tacticians fighting for their very existence. But the United States government responded not with reflection or diplomacy, but with overwhelming force. On the 15th of August, 1876, Congress passed the Indian Appropriations Act, a piece of legislation as cruel as it was effective. The Sioux must sell the Black Hills, or government food rations to the reservations would be stopped completely. Since the buffalo herds had been systematically slaughtered, the Sioux faced a terrible choice: surrender their sacred mountain or watch their children starve. It was extortion at its most brutal, and it worked. Through the fall and winter of 1876, the war continued with smaller engagements and pursuits. At the Battle of Slim Buttes in September, General Crook destroyed the village of Chief American Horse the Elder. The chief died of wounds after hiding his wife and daughter in a cave to protect them from the soldiers. At Warbonnet Creek in July, William Buffalo Bill Cody, serving as a civilian scout, killed and scalped the Cheyenne warrior Yellow Hair in what he called first scalp for Custer, turning tragedy into a sideshow. Morning Star, also known as Dull Knife, led his northern Cheyenne off the reservation to join Crazy Horse, but they were eventually tracked down and defeated at the battle on the Red Fork in November. Each battle saw more lodges burned, more winter supplies destroyed, more horses killed. The strategy was deliberate: make it impossible for the Sioux and Cheyenne to survive off the reservation. Starve them into submission, freeze them into surrender. Sitting Bull, Chief Gall, and several bands of Sioux and Cheyenne fled north into the territory that would become Canada, crossing the Medicine Line in search of safety beyond American jurisdiction. There, in the land the Lakota called Grandmother's Country, they found temporary refuge but little food or game. Meanwhile, Crazy Horse continued to fight throughout the winter, his smaller band of warriors conducting raids and evading army columns through the frozen Badlands. On the 8th of January 1877, Colonel Nelson Miles finally cornered Crazy Horse at Wolf Mountain. In a battle fought during a blinding snowstorm with temperatures far below freezing, the two forces clashed on the icy slopes. Miles' artillery and superior position proved decisive, though casualties were light on both sides. Crazy Horse managed to escape once more, but his people were exhausted, hungry, and freezing. Many quietly slipped away to the reservation, choosing survival over continued resistance. The great warrior chief saw the writing on the snow. On the 5th of May, 1877, the unthinkable happened. Crazy Horse, the legendary Oglala war chief who had never been defeated in open battle, rode into Fort Robinson, Nebraska, and surrendered. Beside him rode nearly 1,000 of his people, gaunt and weary but still proud. It was a moment that marked the end of an era. The soldiers watched in awe and silence as this man, who had become a living legend, agreed to lay down his arms. But the government and military commanders feared him even in surrender. Rumors and jealousies swirled, accusations were made, and on the 5th of September, 1877, just 4 months after his surrender, Crazy Horse was killed while supposedly resisting arrest. A soldier's bayonet pierced his back in the doorway of a guardhouse. He died that night, whispering that he had never wanted to fight, only to protect his people and their sacred land. With his death, the spirit of Plains Indian resistance died too. The Great Sioux War officially ended in May of 1877, but the suffering was far from over. Sitting Bull and Gall remained in Canada until 1881, when dwindling resources and Canadian authorities' pressure forced them to return and surrender. Gall would become a reservation judge and advocate for peace, trying to help his people adjust to a world that no longer existed. Sitting Bull, for a time, became a celebrity, touring with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, his proud face gazing out at crowds who cheered for the man they once called savage. But he returned to Standing Rock Reservation, attempting to learn farming on land that had never been meant for plows. The government divided the Great Sioux Reservation into smaller parcels, and white settlers took the rest. The Black Hills, promised for as long as grass should grow and rivers flow, were lost after just 8 years. In 1889, a Paiute prophet named Wovoka shared a vision that spread like wildfire through the broken reservations. He taught the ghost dance, a spiritual ceremony that promised the return of the dead, the revival of the buffalo, and the disappearance of the white man. It was a desperate hope in a hopeless time, a prayer danced by people who had lost everything. The ghost dance was peaceful, but the authorities saw rebellion. They identified Sitting Bull as the ringleader, though he had never promoted the movement. On the 15th of December, 1890, reservation police came to arrest him. In the confusion and chaos, shots were fired and Sitting Bull fell, killed by his own people forced to serve the government's will. He was 53 years old, and his death seemed to be an omen of something darker still to come. The government's fear of the ghost dance would lead to one final, unforgivable tragedy. 2 weeks after Sitting Bull's death, on a frozen morning of the 29th of December, 1890, the 7th Cavalry surrounded a band of Minneconjou Lakota Sioux at Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota. These people, led by Chief Bigfoot, were cold, sick, and attempting to reach the Pine Ridge Reservation. The soldiers ordered them to surrender their weapons, and as the disarmament began, a shot rang out. What happened next was not a battle but a massacre. The soldiers opened fire with rifles and rapid-firing Hotchkiss guns, shooting into the camp at point-blank range. Over 250 Lakota were killed, most of them women, children, and elderly, many shot while running away or trying to hide. When the guns finally fell silent, bodies lay frozen in the snow in grotesque positions where they fell. The government would call it the Battle of Wounded Knee, but history would eventually acknowledge the truth. It was the final, brutal end to the Great Sioux War and the tragic conclusion to centuries of Plains Indian freedom. The Great Sioux War began with broken promises and ended with broken people. In the span of just 14 years, from the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 to the horror of Wounded Knee in 1890, an entire way of life was destroyed. The buffalo herds that once numbered in the tens of millions were reduced to fewer than 1,000 animals. The vast plains that sustained the Sioux for centuries were carved into parcels and sold to settlers. The Black Hills, sacred beyond measure where the Lakota believed they emerged into this world, were stripped of gold and timber. The great chiefs who fought for their people are remembered now in history books and monuments, but the real story is in what was lost. A culture, a freedom, and a promise that grass would grow and rivers would flow forever. The Great Sioux War stands as a reminder that the cost of westward expansion was paid by those who called the West home long before the first wagon train arrived. Enjoyed this journey through one of history's most pivotal conflicts? Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories from the past. History isn't just about dates and battles, it's about understanding how we got here and learning from those who came before. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.